Welcome back to Talking Points, the podcast where a group of F1 fans just have a good old chin wag, as Tomo would say, about what the racing that we've just saw. And as you can see, it's just myself and Aldas today. Tomo has had a massive weekend, and unfortunately he's actually doing something else today. And Hayden is actually at the Grand Prix himself. He could have just, come in via the mobile phone, but we're giving him the week off. But it is myself and Aldas today. Aldas, how you been, mate? How's your weekend? How did you find the race?
Do you know what? I'm probably the only person on the internet that actually, I thought it was a good race. I'm not saying it was amazing or anything like that, but I thought it was actually a pretty good race. There were some really interesting storylines in the midfield, and obviously, the fight, well, I say fight up front, it was absolute domination by Max, but I thought generally from the beginning to the end, there were some interesting points about it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also a big thanks to everyone who is watching on YouTube, or if you're following us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that lovely good stuff. If you want to follow our podcast, make sure to click the link in the description below. We have pretty much accessible options to any platform you can think of. And if we're not on one of those, then do let us know. And in that case then, let's just jump straight into it. First of all, I want to get your rating out of 10. As you said, you were a big fan of the race. So what would you rate it out of 10?
I'm going to give, I want to say big fan. I think putting words in my mouth there, Matt. No, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. I thought it was people were saying that it was like one of the worst races they've ever seen, like really boring. I thought it was kind of just above average, but kind of a good Formula One race. I thought there was enough kind of going on, especially in the midfield, that to me, it kind of saved it. And even at the beginning, there was a lot of carnage. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I thought it was good. Yeah,
I think I'm going to have to go a little bit lower. I think I'm going to have to go either a high 4 or a low 5. I think I might have to give it a 4. I think it was below average because I think for me it had all the ingredients to be a really good race. We've got the whole news at the moment that Spa may or may not be coming back, obviously for like next year or whatever its future is on the calendar. But I think it had all the ingredients to be a perfect race. You had 7 driver penalties in the end, because originally we were going to have 6, but then Gasly, I think, had to start then from the pit lane. And then we saw, basically all the good, decent drivers starting at the back of the grid. And then, obviously, all the ingredients there to have a good race. And then I think we had a good start. And then I don't think we had, a showstopper, and I think it's it kind of came at a bad time, when obviously all the talks at the moment of should Spa stay on the calendar, or this is what the Ferrari are currently deciding at the moment. And I just don't think it delivered as good. And obviously, this is the first time, we've seen the 22 grids, 2022 cars on the track, because obviously we got all lucked out of not having a race last season, because of all the rain coming through, and the masterclass from George Russell.
Yep.
But yeah, I think for me, you got to get that in. But I think for me, it wasn't a great case for Spa staying on the calendar, in my opinion. I think, we had a great first couple of starting laps, and then basically it kind of just plateaued after that. But let's get into the race then. Let's begin. Lap 1, I was actually quite surprised because, we've had some track changes. They've changed, made Eau Rouge and Radion, a little bit wider for more of the driver safety, and obviously they installed a grandstand there. But the main thing, though, is that they introduced some more gravel traps, particularly on the first corner, where, before we've seen plenty of drivers use all the runoff and use it to their advantage. And I was under the firm belief that we were going to see at least 2 DNFs in the first corner, getting a couple cars beached onto that. But actually, we saw no one go off. All the guys were actually nicely behaved going into the first corner. I don't know, what were you expecting? Because I was expecting 2 DNFs straight away going into that hairpin.
There was a lot of sweepstakes on Twitter about that in terms of how many people were going to end up in the kitty litter there. But do you know what? It's funny, isn't it? You put a gravel trap, exactly. You put a gravel trap at La Source, and guess what? The drivers don't run wide. Could you imagine that? Unbelievable. It's very blatant that when there is runoff there, the drivers can easily just use it a little bit for their advantage, maybe to kind of make the corner a little bit wider and kind of get a bit more speed. When that safety blanket of runoff is there, drivers are going to use it. I mean, it's just how they are. So to me, there was absolutely no surprise. And to be honest, even in the lower formulas, there wasn't too much kind of carnage into that kind of gravel. Even they kind of were, careful about it. So to me, maybe it sounds a little bit kind of like I'm looking back with, hindsight, but I was not surprised at all. The drivers knew that it was there. They knew they couldn't take liberties. And I actually quite like that. I think that was the right thing to do because it's one of those corners where you can gain an advantage if you run a little bit wide. So I was super happy. And to be honest, I wasn't surprised because when there is a gravel trap there, the drivers know that they can't push as much. And although I am very happy that they kind of added it as well. Bring more gravel traps. Like, that is why Spa needs to stay. But we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, and there was obviously, I think they had actually positioned some extra runoff behind the gravel trap. So even if you went through, you could then almost, if you didn't get the car beached or, sort of spinning your wheels up, you could eventually get to some extra road to get back onto the track just behind it. So it wasn't kind of like as soon as you're on it, you're out basically. But yeah, all the boys then seemed very nicely behaved, went down the first couple corners, and then we had our first incident. Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso. Obviously since then, Lewis has looked over it, and I think one of the reporters was trying to, throw a bit of spice into it of saying, Fernando's team message going into it. I don't know about you, mate. It seemed pretty clear cut to me that Lewis was at fault. Obviously, there is that rule. I'm going back to the FIA regulations here of what they've ruled as an overtake. That if you are going into the corner and you are ahead, you do sort of have position of that. But it seemed to me, or seemed to all of us, I'm assuming for all of us watching here, that Lewis, just closed the door, and I think Fernando actually had to take quite a lot of evasive action, like fully getting onto the curb because he just looked like he turned in as if he wasn't there. But, Alonso's your boy, and also Lewis Hamilton's your boy, so what's your thoughts on it, mate?
The moment we saw, first of all, it was quite unclear. It was a big accident in terms of, it wasn't massively high speed because they were kind of in the braking zones, but that's a big bounce. These cars are stiff. There is no suspension, in terms of what we think of suspension is, in like our road cars. Those cars are stiff. So Lewis is definitely going to feel that one today. That was a big bounce.
Totally.
Some of the footage and the pictures, especially, like the still images, you're like, that does not, a Formula 1 car is not supposed to be like that. But it was a spectacular accident. Luckily, no one was kind of hurt, or hopefully Lewis is okay. But I needed to see kind of the replay, and it was, I think, Lewis's fault because he did get it done into the braking zone. The actual overtake was really good because he kind of, compromised Fernando, put him on that kind of inside line. Lewis made a really good kind of, really braking late into the apex. But like he said himself after the race, once he saw it, he couldn't see Fernando, and you kind of have to judge how much space you want to give the car on the inside. You want to give them enough so that if they are there, if they do run a little bit wide, or if, again, start of the race, heavy fuel, very easy to just, run wide a little bit. But you don't want to give them too much space because it's also very easy to then kind of hold it around the outside and maybe, lose the position. And Lewis just misjudged it. He said himself that it was very difficult to see. He made the judgment call of closing the inside a little bit more aggressively. And this time it didn't pay off as far as Fernando. Obviously, he was properly like on the curb. Like, I think he only had one wheel on the tarmac because his car was basically off the track. But it was just one of those collisions that I think, Lewis, first of all, he came out and said it was his fault, which you definitely don't see a lot. I thought the needle from Alonso was just like classic Fernando. I mean, I also thought it was very good of Lewis, actually, that he didn't, and it was actually Rachel Brooks that we saw, obviously, doing like the Sky interview, and she was about to start saying, Fernando actually said this on the radio, and Lewis was just like, I don't care. I actually quite like that. He doesn't care what Alonso has to say. He made the mistake. He kind of apologized for it, and he walked away. So I actually really like that. As far as the needle from Fernando, I mean, he's had that one locked since 2007, no doubt about it. But it was a bit, there's kind of, there's two sides to it. Number one, it is just the adrenaline running. It is just high emotions. It happens all the time. It's also factually wrong. Like, Lewis can clearly race from the back. He isn't just, a driver that kind of, wins from pole and that's it. So it's factually wrong. But it's just one of those things. That's Fernando, isn't it? He's always got something to say. I mean, if you made like a top 10 list of like the most famous team radios, I'm pretty sure Alonso would have like 3 or 4 of those, whether it's like all the time you'll have to leave the space, the GP2 engine. He has always got something to say, but it's just one of those things. Lewis has to take it on the chin. I think he's quite fortunate actually not to get a grid penalty because it was his fault, but ultimately in the end, it's quite frustrating because I do think he might have had the pace to maybe get on the podium and beat Sainz. So ultimately, I think he's the bigger kind of loser there.
Oh, I don't know about that one. But I think for me, like looking at Lewis's onboard, it seems to me that, like, I think from what I could see, because obviously he came out afterwards and sort of said like, oh, he was in my blind spot and that was the reason for it. And as you said, it was a misjudgment there. I think Lewis probably thought he got the job done and then moved back to get more onto the racing line. And that's where, unfortunately, the judgment wasn't quite there, because obviously Alonso was still on the inside, and obviously he moved across thinking he wasn't there. And obviously Alonso, there was nowhere for him to go. As you said, he fully was on the curb anymore. He would have just been spinning out onto the grass, basically. And it's great to see that, Lewis got to walk away from that. Because, the photos, I mean, we'll probably be using one of the photos for the thumbnail on this podcast, because it's so, dramatic, and it's, it kind of looks like one of those, sort of fun Photoshop memes where, someone's, cut him out and then rotated it even more. It's so mad that you see that when you see it there. He's also gotten a warning as well for not going to the medical tent afterwards, because obviously there's a certain amount of they've got obviously a telemetry in the car for how aggressive an accident can be, and if it's above a certain amount of G, I think it is, then it's mandatory for you to go to the medical tent, which apparently Lewis didn't go to. Just also touch on the whole team radio thing as well. We've seen Seb come up before during the team press conference, calling down and thinking it's all bullshit, and saying you can't ridicule a driver for what he says over a radio. Obviously, there's you have to take that sometimes with a pinch of salt, because whatever some drivers do say on radios can have actually a proper knock-on effect. But in that scenario there, when you're at the very beginning of the race, your adrenaline is super, super high, and some of the drivers here, we've seen the results of horrific accidents at this track before. And when you're in that environment, of course, you're going to say things which, you say in the heat of the moment. And the whole reason of team radios being broadcast onto TV, it's just for entertainment value. And you've got to take everything with a pinch of salt. And I think the analogy Seb said once before is, if you had football players all being mic'd up, some of the stuff they could say out, you would be horrifically cancelled and what have you with it. But it's part of the adrenaline of being a top level athlete and having to perform to the best of your ability. So you do have to take everything with a pinch of salt there. But also at that same sort of corner, well, just actually in the next corner over in that chicane there, I also want to quickly touch on Vettel and Stroll. I think this is one of the very few times where I've got to go to Stroll's defence here and say, Vettel just fully pushed him onto the gravel there. I don't think Vettel actually got penalised for it. And obviously you could always say, his lap one shenanigans there. But I wanted to get your take on it, because I think it's one of the first times, since, Vettel has announced his retirement, from the summer break, and it's the first time they've been racing since. It kind of just seemed to be a little bit screw it, I'm just doing my own race here. But what did you think of that? Because I actually thought that was a bit unfair. And I thought actually Vettel probably should have got a little bit of a penalty for that, because I think Stroll actually moved back 2 or 3 spots and maybe even got some floor damage from it. So what's your take on that, mate?
Whenever it comes to these Lance Stroll and Sebastian Vettel kind of almost collisions or very tight racing where usually in the past it's actually been Seb that's been on the receiving end.
Yeah.
I've actually always kind of half defended Stroll, because I think even though it is obviously a little bit tricky to do that, against your teammate, they're still racing at the end of the day. And so I've got to keep the same energy and say that Sebastian Vettel was only doing what Lance Stroll was doing to him. When it came to Monza last year in the podcast, I still defended Stroll a little bit. When it came to France, I said, what Stroll did on the final corner of the final lap, kind of parking it on the apex. It's a tricky move, and yes, of course, it looks a little bit different when it's against your teammates. So some people say, you've got to give kind of liberties, but these guys are still fighting against each other. So to me, Seb just was doing exactly what Lance Stroll was doing. And as much as I thought what Lance, did earlier to Seb was kind of again, borderline because it's your teammate, you're still racing. You're still looking to be that person. I think Seb was ahead. He obviously saw the opportunity to kind of squeeze out a rival, even though it was, Lance. And yeah, it was obviously tricky putting him into the gravel, but yeah, to me, it was just kind of very hard racing, which we've seen from these two in the past. So I know it's borderline, but I'm gonna keep the same energy. I think what Seb did is exactly what Lance has been doing. So yeah, keep it going.
I just feel like if it was, say, 7 or 8 laps further into the race and we saw that, I think because there's so much going on in that first lap, that's why I feel as it was a little bit further on into the first lap, I think if it was 2 different drivers, let's say it was, Ocon and let's say Tsunoda, for example, if Ocon had pushed him into the gravel, and it was a push, it wasn't like, oh, a little too, like, it was fully like, I'm moving across as if you're not there. I think that would have been like a time penalty. I think he probably got away with it just because it was lap 1 sort of shenanigans.
Yes.
It kind of always seems that like you can do whatever you want on lap 1, like even that's track limits or, pushing someone off. It's all kind of like, well, it's all part of like the big mess, and it's always going to be a big mess in lap 1, so we just ignore it. That's why they never even show like, the timing tower on the first lap, because there's so many people moving positions. Otherwise it'd just be going crazy in the TV graphics. But yeah, I think going back to your point though of like, in France, I think, Stroll was, not to like sort of bring it back up again, but like, I think Stroll was allowed to kind of just do that, park it on the apex, because like he didn't like brake check or anything. He just didn't really accelerate off from it.
I think it's more Monza last year. That's a better comparison.
Yeah, good point there. But I think with here, I think like it's very much more deliberate. Nah, off you go, mate. I don't. But that's he's not. I think that's where Seb is not even really seeing Stroll as like a, hey, we're working together as teammates here, because it's very much like, you're not going to do that well in the team's championship. I just want to end on a high. Don't care who your dad is. Like, I'm just going to go for it.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's like a school thing. Like, I don't care who your dad is, mate. I'll do what I want.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, I mean, listen, Seb had a great race. I mean, where did he finish in? Like P8 or something? So, I mean, you can't, say what you want, but he had a fantastic race. Yeah, finishing P8. So, the result speaks for itself, I think. Exactly that.
I think Hayden will be absolutely fuming if he was on here, but he was actually he's not here though. I think Hayden was positioned on the last chicane on the last corner, and I think he probably would have been able to see his boy do a few overtakes on that one. So at least he's got a smile on his face. But one lap later on, the guy celebrating his last race at Spa, Latifi, on his own accord, going into the gravel at the same spot and then tagging Bottas. I think, we need to have a good old chat about the Canadian here. Like, I was looking back at the replay. He just goes wide on his own accord, goes into the gravel, weird. And then because he goes into the gravel, it spins him out because he's effectively, as soon as he goes onto the gravel, he then lights up the rears, which then pulls out the rear end. He then spins back onto track, narrowly missing, I can't remember who the other driver was. But then unfortunately, Bottas, fair play to him, was doing taking almost onto the grass. But by doing so, Latifi's front wing just touches Bottas's rear tyre. And Latifi managed to get away from it, but Bottas got beached, and that was race over for him. And I was like...
On his birthday as well.
On his birthday. And like, I was... Again, like, we've been talking about this his entire time, and I always make every joke that every race, that this is Latifi's last race, that he celebrates it. Like, the farewell tour. I mean... I think early in the week, we saw the news that, that I can't remember who said it from Williams, but they were sort of alluding that, like, both drivers, like both Albon and Latifi, they don't really need to make much change to their driver lineup. Surely this is a clear case scenario that, like, Latifi, he needs to leave. You see the gap distance between Albon and Latifi. Like, Albon, fair play to him. He coming out and saying, we've got the straight line speed, but in the corners, the car is really, really twitchy. And Latifi, he's just struggling to keep it on track. Like, Aldas, what do you think about this? Because, like, my case here. I think Latifi needs to get out of this sport, and I don't care like what money he's bringing into it. You can't be making these mistakes like when you're like that level. What do you think on this, man?
There's multiple levels to this. Number one, in terms of the actual incident, it was a weird incident because he actually squeezed someone and actually got the move done. Obviously it was quite an aggressive move, but you think, okay, so going into Lake Comi, I think he squeezes someone off and actually gets the move. But then on the racing line, he goes wide, which is a bit odd. I don't even know how that happened. Like, maybe he misjudged it. Maybe there's just a bit of instability. Obviously, again, I think it was lap 2, so heavy on fuel, but whatever. He actually got the move done and then still went wide, and inadvertently took out Valtteri. I don't know if they actually made contact or not, but Valtteri was just trying to avoid him. And so,
he did.
He did. So, that was kind of carnage. But that was his race, and ultimately he finished last. And so, it is what it is. But this was just another one of those like worrying races. I think it was actually Jost Capito that said, that he doesn't see that, they need to change anything, but they do, because this weekend, like in just a window, Alex Albon really did maximize the car. The Williams doesn't have a lot of downforce, but it was the quickest car on the straights. I think in qualifying, Albon actually had purple in sector 1. He was the quickest driver effectively through just one corner, through last horse, because they basically just stripped all of the downforce off, the little that they even had.
Yeah.
And he maximized what the car was capable of. He was able to use his kind of, racing IQ to get that 1 point, hold off a bunch of the midfield and cause that DRS train.
Yeah.
And fair play. He showed what that car was capable of, even got into Q3. Now, I know there's obviously a lot of penalty tax, but even so, he really did do a good job. When you look at Latifi, this was a weekend where the car could have scored points, as we saw, because the fastest driver shows the potential of the car. You can say what you want about cars suiting different drivers, but that's how Formula One has been and always will be. The performance of the car is dictated by the quickest driver, and Latifi was nowhere near Albon. So yeah, it's just another one of these, isn't it? I know that he's only ever had the slowest car in Formula One, but it's not as if that car has never been capable of results. And on the odd occasion when it has, he's either not been able to maximize the performance of the car or made mistakes. And yeah, this is just another incident in a long line of why Latifi, I think, his days are numbered, or at the very least, it's only Williams that are ever going to give him a seat.
And I think that's the thing. I think you raised a really good point there, is that if Latifi wasn't in that seat, Williams might not be the slowest car on the grid. Albon got a point here. Imagine if both drivers were effectively, let's say, imagine in a world where we had two Albons, we could see the car potentially, always being near the top 10. Whereas at the moment, you got Albon who finishes P10 here and Latifi finishing plumb last. And you said it best there, they came into this race knowing they had some straight line speed. Yes, in the corners, they're going to really struggle because you got no downforce going into the corners, but Albon was able to adapt to that and make it work. Yes, there were some twitchy moments for him, but he still got it into the point. And obviously there's been times before, where Latifi has made it into a points, not on his own accord, I should say. And there's been sometimes he's had a good race here or there, but we've seen it before with Russell, where Russell was always out qualifying the car, and now we've seen Albon do it. And it's kind of well, actually, let's take a step back. Maybe Williams' car isn't that bad. Maybe it is just reliant more on the actual driver. If we had the same ability of having someone like George or even Albon having that as another driver, maybe we would see next year the Williams have a massive progression going up into it. But
I think the way I've always said is that team is capped at what they can achieve. The potential of whatever car they give their drivers is capped because Latifi is not able to kind of perform at that level. So theoretically, the example I've always used is that if you give the two Williams drivers the Alpine, so you have two teams, you have the actual Alpine team with Alonso and Ocon, and you have the Williams team with the same car as Alpine, but it's Albon and Latifi driving. The combination of Alonso and Ocon is always going to score more points as a collective because Latifi is capped at what he'd be able to do. So I'm not saying if you gave him a midfield car, he wouldn't be able to be a point scorer, but he'd never be that level of driver, like the top end guys. I think Albon, up against someone like Ocon or Alonso, I think he could do a decent job. He could genuinely, challenge those guys, but Latifi never will. So they're always capped regardless of how good their car is.
And Williams really needs to just have a look at the team structure that, if you've got Latifi, who's constantly finishing last place, why should you then take on his feedback on how to improve the car? If you've seen your teammate, get into P10 and stuff, who is working the car, yes, the car might not be working to the full extent, but if he can get it to a position where it's near the points or in the points, then of course you need to be taking his feedback. But with Latifi, for the team's sake, why would you listen to the driver who can't even get it from last place? If he's telling you the feedback and it's not actually improving the car, then that's the issue where they need to replace him. If he's not actually the one getting it into the points on a regular basis or even getting near there, then it's not going to really work out. But anyway, moving on from that. So from
I was going to say,
it
sounded like you had that pent up for a while, Matt, about Latifi.
I mean, we always talk, I always give shit, to Mick Schumacher on Fraud Watch, but Latifi, I think it comes to a point now here. It's so clear, I think, to all of us that Latifi is needing to go from the team, and it's kind of now just on Williams to actually figure out themselves if they want to progress properly into the sport, they need to move on. But anyway, from that, Latifi then brings out the safety car. And actually, Ferrari surprised us all and pit Charles Leclerc, but not because of any tyre issues or anything, but he reports that he gets there's a bit of smoke coming up from the front right rear, which, Aldas, you actually caught on to what this was. So please explain to everyone exactly what happened to Leclerc here.
So it was a very unfortunate situation. It was one of those where the reason why there was smoke from his front right brake is because something unfortunately got stuck, which does happen, especially when you're in the midfield and, with other cars, whether it's like stones or even in this case, it was actually a visor tear off. So unfortunate for Leclerc, he had to make that early pit stop. And so that kind of put him on the back foot. But after the race, when obviously, F1 TV or everyone on Twitter was kind of looking through and all the pictures were getting released, we found out that the driver in front of Leclerc was Max Verstappen, and you can see Max Verstappen on lap 1 take a tear off, and basically because of all of the dust in the midfield, he said after the race that he needed to take a tear off because he couldn't see anything, and you can see actually from Leclerc's POV, Verstappen's tear off literally like actually collide, go into his car, and obviously that's the thing that went into his brakes. So, I mean, that is just brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
The thing that makes kind of ruins Leclerc's race at the beginning is a visor tear off, and whose is it? Max Verstappen. It's just uncanny. Like, you can literally see Max taking it off, and you can actually see from Leclerc's onboard like the light kind of flickering off the tear off as it's flying through the air, and it's just brilliant. It's honestly like Mario Kart style. Like, you just drop one of those bananas or something, and Leclerc's not quite spun out, but yeah, he's been absolutely done. So it's just brilliant, isn't it? It's just awesome. But summarizes Ferrari season.
And for those who don't know, obviously, like the tear-offs on the visor, it's not just like, the sort of the plexi you have of the actual visor. The tear-offs are basically like 10 or 15 layers of like really thin plastics. And then drivers, during the race, they can like sort of peel off like a layer of their visor to like basically to act as like window wipers. Because obviously during the race, you're getting so much like, either like rubber from the tires or dirt or dust or water or whatever it could be. So then the visor is always clear for the driver. One thing though as well, which is a bit frustrating, is that like the visor itself is actually quite thin plastic. So obviously there was some smoke coming from Leclerc, and that's the reason why he pitted. He obviously didn't know it was like a visor tear. If he just saw a bit of smoke coming up from it. But one of the annoying things about it though is that after like a lap or so, the visor would have actually just melted away because it's such thin like material. So I actually don't, because I think it actually went into the brake coolant, which is basically sort of like the duct of where air can come in to basically cool down the brakes. And then obviously it gone all the way down to the bottom of the point where it's hottest, and that's where you see some smoke coming up from it. And as they're on the cool down from the safety car, that's when they're not using the brakes as much and they're just seeing it burn away. So actually I don't think it actually would have actually caused that much damage to the brakes, if anything at all. If anything, it was just kind of burning away. So obviously in hindsight, it could be just like stay out, it's absolutely fine. But obviously, he came in to sort of change the tyres, and just so then they could just make sure there's nothing properly wrong with the brakes. But then let's move on to where should we go on to then? I think maybe go on to the race restart. Wasn't as much of a big pile-up as I think we were kind of all expecting. And I think this is kind of fortunately where, for me at least, the race kind of then plateaued a little bit. I think it's kind of safe to say, just because I think
like the first 3 laps, then that's it.
Yeah, the first 3 laps, because I tweeted about this saying as I said at the beginning of the podcast, that this race has all the ingredients of being a perfect race, seeing like all the great drivers starting at the back of the field, all of them are going to have to charge through and overtake. And then because of the lap 1 sort of shenanigans, then it's kind of then basically just went into the Red Bull is faster than most of the cars in the grid, so Max is passing everyone going forward. And I
think it was the rate that he passed everyone, because he went from P14 to P8 at the end of lap 1, and his onboard, by the way, is just phenomenal in terms of like Max is such a different driver now. You can see that he's thinking about risk management. He's not going to go for a crazy move because he knows how much pace he has in hand. By lap 12, he actually worked his way up to P1, but that was during the cycle of pit stops. And then I think it was by lap 18, he passed Sainz after the first round of pit stops for the actual race lead. Yeah. And that's it. From lap 0 to lap 18, and then all the way to lap 44, he led the race. I mean, that's how quickly, and that's how much of a pace advantage he had. But he just got through the field with, it looked like a video game. It did look like it was just on so like 90% AI. And that's just that's how quick he was. I mean, let's not forget also, he did qualify on pole. I mean, I know he had that kind of, penalty, but 6/10 over Sainz, like around Spa, I mean, that's pretty chunky. I'm not going to lie. So yeah, Max was just in a class of one, like on a different planet. We use these phrases all the time, but he really was. And ultimately, that's why I think the race maybe wasn't as good, because say it took him 30 or 35 laps to get to the front. Obviously, the race is 44 laps. I think it would have like a bit of a different, perspective. But because he managed to get kind of into the lead of the race by lap 18 out of 44, like not even halfway distance, that's why maybe the race isn't kind of, maybe it wasn't as exciting, but I still think there was enough in the midfield with the likes of Ocon making a really good comeback. There was a battle between Alonso and Vettel as well. So that's what kind of saved it for me, to be honest.
Yeah, I think just like as you mentioned, like sort of lap 2 is when Verstappen was then to pass Sergio Perez, and you had a little bit of like team radio of him being like, "Come on, you're just holding me up here," kind of thing. But that's normal for drivers to be like, "Come on, let me through." Obviously Max was on the soft tyre, and I believe Perez was on the medium. And actually, I think Max stayed out longer than Perez did on the mediums. I might be wrong about that. But, seeing the pace that Max had on a soft compound, in theory, the tyre degradation, that was just a big, talking point, going into Spa because of the track temperature. A lot of people were struggling with the hard tyres. That they just couldn't get it kind of like almost they couldn't get it into the right temperature, but then on the soft it was almost too much. But it seemed like Max just was absolutely flying with it. He was absolutely fine with it, and to the point where I think Perez pitted first when Max was still on the soft and making this charge going all the way through. But what a charge from Max here, and like well deserved for me. Getting. I don't want to go jump onto the head-to-heads, but him getting driver of the day.
Shock. Who do you think is going to get it for Red Bull? Let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think this is one of the few races where you don't want easy wins for Max Verstappen. I think for all of us, unless something really dramatically happens, this is going to be easy going to go to Verstappen for the title here. But these are one of the very few races where everyone has to take a PU penalty, including Verstappen, and that's where he's just like, all right, well, I'll just charge through the grid. And this is one of the very few cases where it does show off that he's now not as hot-headed, not having to do dive bombs going into turn 1, or like you said, pulling off risky moves. It's just like, it's going to be a long race. It's going to be a long marathon. So I'll just pick off when I can, do like an overtake per race. And as you said, come lap 18 after sort of the pit stops, if Verstappen then takes the actual lead from Sainz. And you know what? I think as well, I think Sainz did a good job. I think going out from lap 1, he actually had a pretty decent lead over Perez. Because obviously they weren't.
Perez had a shocking start, by the way. He got saved by that Hamilton and Alonso kind of incident. But I think when it comes to Max, there was nothing. Whatever Ferrari strategy, whatever strategy Ferrari tried, whatever Perez tried to do, there was just nothing because he had so many laps in hand even afterwards. And there was something amazing. Obviously, Leclerc tried to go for the fastest lap at the end of the race. Max set his fastest lap on lap 32. So he was coasting by the end of it, and Leclerc's quickest lap at the end of the race on fresh tyres, low fuel, was still 0.6 lower than Verstappen's. That's how much of an advantage he had, and this was just a pure pace win. It was one of those wins where it was amazing. On Friday, when we knew he had the engine penalty, we knew that he would be kind of outside the top 10, we didn't know where they were going to be because there's so many drivers that had engine penalties, but him starting 14th or I think it was 15th at first, and then Gasly, I think, got, pushed a little bit back. So he started 14th in the end. No one was surprised that Max Verstappen won it from 14th. And that in itself is just crazy. I mean, we talk about Ferrari struggling to win from pole position because of how, close they are with Red Bull. This was just a pure pace win where he had a good half a second over the rest of the grid. And it was just nuts. I mean, we're looking at a guy starting outside the top 10 and we're going, how quickly is he going to get to the front and how quickly is he going to win this race? So that just underlines what I've never thought that about a driver, before the race. I've never gone, he's starting 13th. He's going to win this. I had no doubt with Max Verstappen. And I even tweeted, actually, you can give him as many grid penalties as you want. He is always going to be with a shot of winning this race. And he did within 18 laps.
And I think it just really goes to show as well, Red Bull, they've just designed such a car. I know we've talked about Perez not having a great race. He's still got a second for the team, but I mean, they've really designed that car fully around Max, and it's just working gloriously. They don't need to change, I think, anything with, whether it's the driver roster or anything with their package or anything like that, because I think for me, it's going to be clear that he's going to win the title, and I think it's going to be an easy dub as well for Red Bull. Fair play to them.
Checo's now second in the title. He's moved up. I do think, by the way, I will just, so that it's not all doom and gloom, I think Spa specifically it really kind of, it aided the RB18. Like, this was a track where it was just at its absolute best, because even when they took a bunch of downforce off and had that amazing kind of straight line speed, there was enough efficient downforce that they were still quick in that second sector. Like, with Ferrari, they found it very tricky with tyres, because as the temperature kind of got higher on the Sunday, as the temperatures increased, the tyre wear really ramped up. I mean, Sainz in the cooldown room said that when he put the softs on, he had 3 laps of really amazing pace, and after that, that's it, they were dead. Like, it was just tyre management the rest of the way. And as far as Merc, because they struggled to get kind of tyre temperature, they had to put a hell of a lot more downforce to even get any kind of, to activate the tyres, and that completely kind of got rid of that killed their straight line speed. So this was, I think, one of the tracks where the RB18 was just at its absolute best. The driver also had 3 or 4 tenths in his pocket as well, so everything came together for Max to deliver easily the most dominant kind of result in his F1 career. So, but I don't think that's going to be kind of the same going forward. I think Zandvoort is going to swing a lot more to Ferrari.
And onto, I think, the last biggest talking point of the race before we go on to the head-to-heads and also some other subjects as well. Let's talk about lap 43. The absolute meme that it is of the Ferrari team, of the strategy team, pitting Leclerc for the fastest lap. I'm just honestly just lost for words. By the way. That he didn't want. I'm just lost for words. Like, I don't know what's going on with the team. Like, the fact that they called him in for that, and obviously, now, don't want to gloss over it too much. There is going to be some blame on Leclerc just because he got caught speeding in the pit lane. That's not the team's fault. Leclerc just came in too quick. Basically, what happens when drivers come into onto the line into the pit lane? Most of the time, they slam onto the brakes, ruining the tires basically. So then you're maximising that there's much time as you can, not losing time going into the pits. And for what I believe is that he just broke a bit too, or he didn't get the car stopped in time, and then therefore got the speeding in the pit lane sort of penalty, which got applied to him after the race. So ignoring that, it was the team's decision to pit him for the fastest lap. Now, if Hayden was here, I know exactly what he would say. He would be like, oh, well, Sainz would never do that. He would ignore the team because Sainz has the master plan, because remember in Monaco, he ignored the team orders and therefore perfect. Now, ignore that, right?
Is that We've established Gullis?
That is very much Hayden Gullis.
Mate.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. I'm Hayden. There you go. That's a perfect impression there. No, but We've established now, Charles is working one-to-one with the team. Whatever the team say, he does. Because obviously, he doesn't know how far back Alonso is. He is putting his trust into the team of strategists, of the multi-million pound company that's got all the data there and stuff. They make the decision, he follows it. And then, they release him behind Alonso. And we're just I think all of us are just we can see on the interval on the timing screen, just
brilliant. You can see it into that source as Leclerc's exiting. You're like, hang on a minute, Alonso's getting well close here. He's going to have a run on him.
And it's just
brilliant.
I think for all of us, we're just a bit what the hell is going on? You're in a good position. You're not going to get fastest lap here. And you've just put him out in, I don't want to say traffic, you've put him in the way of Alonso. And yes, he did clear Alonso come the end of the race, but unfortunately they didn't keep that position because of the penalty. But still then you've just compromised your last lap to get the fastest lap. And it's just
still didn't get it.
What's your thoughts on it, mate? Because I'm just so gobsmacked that these rookie mistakes are happening from a seasoned veteran team. And it's so clear to us, anyone watching the race, just on what decision making does that make any sense? You're just doing that all for a point, and now you've lost even more points. It makes no sense. But what do you think about it, mate?
I do. Do you know what? Actually, even looking at it afterwards, Leclerc is now third in the championship. I think he's almost 100 points. I think he's 96 or something behind. As if 1 point is going to swing this championship. Do you know what I mean? But the only thing I will defend them on is that I think Formula One there's such a spotlight on Ferrari that there is a very good reason why so much of their team radio, especially mid-race with Leclerc and his engineer, was broadcasted. Clearly Formula One are trying to seriously just put them under even tighter screws. I want to kind of defend that part mid-race where one thing that I didn't like about Hungary is that I don't think there was enough kind of communication between Ferrari and Leclerc in terms of Leclerc knowing that he's going to be on the hard tyre, and the team was almost asking, are you sure you want to go on the hard tyre? That's what we're planning. And I think Leclerc in Hungary should have actually said, no. From what I'm feeling in terms of the tyre warm-up on the mediums, I don't want to go on the hard. So in a weird way, the only thing I'll defend is that I actually like that, even though perhaps it didn't, sound great, there was a bit more communication between Ferrari. His engineer asked him, we're thinking hards or mediums and we're going to put you in this position. You're going to have to work back. Do you want this, yes or no? So that's a bit of progress. I didn't mind that too much. Again, maybe there's more of a concise way to say it, because it did sound like, I think it was Dan, Engine Mode, that said on Twitter, like the guy's actually, his engineer is asking him like a maths GCSE question, but I didn't mind that. Asking your driver, what tire do you want to be on? There's a bit more communication there. However, the fastest lap fiasco, first of all, we heard on the team radio that Leclerc didn't even want to go for it. How do you misjudge the gap? Because the funny part is, I actually think the pit stop was quick. Like the actual, and also, he did speed in the pit lane. So the actual time in the box was almost the best that it could have been. It was a quick pit stop. He didn't obviously, he also sped. So, he kind of got the best part out of it. And he was still behind Alonso. Like, surely you have to have more kind of, in terms of like, what about if we have a 3-second pit stop? That's the margin that we're looking for. Give him a bit of comfort space so that he will still come out ahead of Alonso. When it's that tight with 2 laps to go, why would you risk it? Now, what's really funny is that they only gave him 2 laps. So when he actually fell behind Alonso, he spent the next lap, which could have been his quick lap, overtaking him. So they should have pulled him in maybe like 3 or 4 laps, to give him a good 3 or 4 laps to try his hand at the fastest lap. So on so many levels, I just don't really get it. Ultimately, it's still, Leclerc's mistake. Like he locked up, and if anyone's wondering, by the way, by how much he sped, the pit lane speed limiter in Spa is 80 kilometers an hour, and he did 81. 1 kilometer an hour. That's what he got caught at. So that's the margins in F1. But yeah, Leclerc's mistake, Ferrari, needless. I don't even know why they went for it. They didn't even have a safe enough gap. So yeah, it's just a bad day all around, really, isn't it?
And I think, like they're going for an extra point, and as a result, they lost 2 more points from that. And it's just like, rules are rules. You got to do it. And I would say, like, it doesn't provoke a lot of confidence, to me at least, the team asking a driver midway through, what tyre do you prefer? I mean, that's why you've got the free practice sessions, and like even to qualifying to try and gauge, I know they're doing like race setups, like sort of trims and sort of like getting actual practice and lap time into the track to see what works and what doesn't work. I think midway through a race, asking a driver, what do you think? I think by that point, you need to have it in your, you need to have it kind of locked in.
I think there was a lot more. The thing about on the Sunday is because the temperatures went up, there was a lot more deg. It should have been an easy one stop, they thought, from the Friday. But again, I don't mind that. Again, the way they asked it isn't great, but I don't mind asking the driver, do you think can you make the medium work, or do you think you can make the hard work? So I'll defend them on that a little bit, because the temperature went up and it was a bit more difficult for all of the teams. So yeah.
So moving on from
someone's
that,
got to stand up for them, mate.
Yeah, no one else is at the moment. So fair play to you, mate, with your little Ferrari flag on. So just before we get onto the head-to-heads then, let's actually have a quick chat about Spa itself. Obviously there's a lot of chat at the moment about if it's coming back, because I just before we started the podcast, Aldous, you mentioned that they have gotten a 1-year extension, but just before 1 more year. But this is the first time now we've seen the 22 cars race around it, and this has been kind of obviously the theme this season, us going to old sort of classic circuits, and I think our next big one is going to be Monza, to see how these new regulation cars are tackling these new circuits. I want to get your thoughts on how you thought the cars are performing here, because obviously we saw the domination, of the Red Bull of Max Verstappen, coming from 14th to go to first. Ignoring that, I think if we didn't have that, I think the race wouldn't have been as good. I think the race would have probably been even a 2 out of 10. Yes, we had some bit of fighting out in the midfield, but I've got to be quite harsh here. I don't think these new cars are suited to the track. And I love Spa. It's one of my favourite tracks of all time. But in terms of the racing here, I just don't think it delivered that well. I think the gravel trap at Turn 1 is a great inclusion of it. I don't know if there is any more changes the track can really do to make the racing better. But seeing this race, it's not a great argument to say it being in the calendar is good, because at least, with Monaco, you've got the qualifying aspects. Yes, the racing isn't always as good unless it was like this year where you got rain halfway through and it's a constant parameters are changing. And also that's something, maybe something in future, if it was a bit more of a wet race, maybe we can see a bit more of an exciting one. But I don't know. What are your thoughts with Spa? Because as I said, I'm a huge fan of Spa. It's one of my favourite circuits. But in terms of the racing, if you were to remove the Red Bull here, I don't think it delivered that much of a banger.
Completely disagree. I actually think it was the complete opposite. I think the problem with this race was that Red Bull and Max were just amazing. So that's what you're focusing on. You're thinking Max led for over 30 laps. I mean, yeah, I think actually what Red Bull achieved, it takes away from actually what happened in the midfield. When you look lower down, you had massive tyre deg, which I think kind of threw a little spanner into the works for the top teams. All of a sudden, in the race, the Mercedes almost looked like they had a bit more race pace than Ferrari. So you had that kind of, again, I'm going to say the opposite. Remove the Red Bulls. It was actually a pretty kind of tense race to the end. We could have had theoretically a Carlos Sainz, George Russell chasing him down for the win. 2 seconds separating them. We had slower cars like the Williams kind of be able to get into a window and have a certain kind of setup where he was able to hold off the likes of the Aston Martins, the McLarens, the Alpha Tauris. So you had that, which you will not see around a place like Hungary, because ultimately that's a place where, say, downforce is king. And then you also had the Alonso Vettel and Esteban Ocon battle as well, which Esteban Ocon pulled off 2 double overtakes, which, by the way, were absolutely incredible. I mean, into the bus stop, overtaking Latifi and Ricciardo, that was a great move. And I thought the second one was even better, like a proper Hakkinen Schumacher yeah. 2000, yeah. I think it was against Vettel and maybe Pierre Gasly. Vettel and Gasly. So that's why, to me, I don't think this race was actually shown in the best light because of how strong the fight was up front, and that's the big takeaway from the race. But lower down, you had multiple teams scoring points. I mean, Alpine, AlphaTauri, Aston Martin, Williams, and I think that's why we can see, why this track, it does allow overtaking. Now, the power of the DRS, what should it be that powerful? That's maybe a different conversation, but I think that this race actually delivered some good racing if you didn't just focus on, the battle for the lead, which was kind of really one-sided. In terms of the actual track itself, at least they have invested money in trying to make it better. There's so many tracks that, they make so much money that they don't really care about changing it, because ultimately they have such a long contract with Formula One. Spa actually did, they added different grandstands. They changed a massive part of the track in terms of adding different gravel points, and also changing the iconic kind of corner in terms of Radion and then Eau Rouge as well, reprofiling both of them, adding extra runoff. So the track is trying to take on feedback of what the fans in Formula One say, and I feel like there is still a place. Forget about the history, which it's important to me, but it's not important to a lot of other people. But I feel like this kind of race where also the fan experience of camping and things like that, it does deserve to stay, because it shouldn't all just be about, into the city, the really fast tracks with absolutely, zero margin for error with the really close barriers. That seems to be the way that, Saudi and Miami, it seems to be the way that Formula One wants to go. But I think there is a space for, in the middle of a forest, kind of this camping experience. And Formula One tracks for racing and fans should give a broad kind of experience. And I think that, to me, Spa, it's one of the heritage tracks. The drivers still absolutely love it around one lap. So to me, the circumstances of this race, I think, made it look worse than it actually is, because just wait until we get to Monza, because Monza is always a DRS train, but ultimately it's another one of those races you want to win. And I think Spa is the same. So yeah, I'm going to defend Spa. I'm like a defense attorney today. What's going on?
Yeah, and I do realise I'm being a bit harsh, and I'm no way am I saying it should not be in the... I want it to stay in the F1 calendar.
I've convinced you then, haven't I? I've
convinced
you.
No. I think for me, it's because I built it up so much. Like I said, I'll say for the third or fourth time, is they had the ingredients of a perfect race, and I was expecting to have way more battles because you got the faster guys towards the back. But maybe if we didn't have all these engine penalties, maybe we would have seen some different racing, and maybe even had Lewis in it as well, and maybe we would have seen something a bit better.
Actually, on that, why did everyone take engine penalties at Spa? Why did they not take them at Hungary or next time at Zandvoort? It's because they knew that they can overtake around Spa. And that's not something that you can say about a lot of tracks.
Yeah, exactly that. And so just before we go into the head-to-heads, one thing I want to have a chat to you about, mate. Going back to Ferrari. I I'm
not
sorry.
been battered enough.
I'm just. Well, no. I think like. I think we need to have the serious chat now about Binotto. I am of the firm belief now that Ferrari need to move him on. Like, I'm sorry, but like the team need to have a leader. They need to have a clear direction. And for me, it's so obvious that like he is not the man for the job. I know he's been integrated with that team for years. I think originally being like the CTO for it as well. But like we see it with these other teams of like having a clear leader figure who are pointing a team into the right direction and trying to make improvements. I mean, hell, we've even seen that, with Zach Brown, of like making harsh sort of driver change decisions, but it's all to move the team forward. And I think it's the reason I want to have a chat about it real quick is just because like even with the previous race where the strategy was so clear that they messed up, but Binotto doesn't admit that it's the team's fault, and I don't know if he's just doing that for like for a pride reason. He doesn't want to like belittle the team or what have you.
He's trying to protect the team. He's trying to
and he's trying to protect their heritage and stuff like that. But when it's so obviously clear that they've done something wrong, to have that like non-negative view on anything and still think, oh no, we are still the best, we're still doing great. I think it's just so sort of like delusional. And my firm belief is that come the end of the season, he should be moved on. I don't know who would be the replacement for that, but it needs to be this like sort of leader figure that the team can properly rally behind and have a clear focus. Because I think I think like WTF1 actually did a great video about it, talking about how many points Ferrari have lost because of the strategy. And like, even to the point where I think they've actually like Ferrari they've lost a couple of wins this season just purely on like on their team's decisions. And you just can't have that in this sort of sport. You need to have a clear focus. And it's as ruthless as it is with the drivers. If you make a mistake, I'm sorry, that's only in a few spots here that you need to be the best of the best. It should also apply to the team principles. There's only 10 spots, who could be a leader of the team. And I think Binotto has been in it now, being the leader of the team enough now that he is not going to be the guy for the job. But I want to get your two cents on it, because for me, like, unless they turn it around this season, I think it's a clear case scenario of like, sorry, mate, but you're going to have to get your P34 in place.
Unless they turn it around this season. What universe are you living at, mate? It's just about how quickly Max is going to win the title now.
Well, no, I think it's more the case of like they just need to stop making these stupid mistakes, because it's so clear to us that like they need to like, obviously I don't think they're going to win the championship in either of them, either teams or the drivers, but I think they need to like, you need to start like stop making these mistakes. But yeah, what's your thoughts on Binotto here?
I don't necessarily disagree. The only thing I will say is that you mentioned he should be gone. Who did you put in place then? Who's the guy? This is my leader. There you go. He's the guy up next. I'm going to put him. He's the guy that's going to bring Ferrari back. Who is it? Where is this guy or girl?
John Todd. He's no longer doing stuff at the FIA. Get him back into position.
Brilliant. I mean, might as well just bring back Fernando Alonso back to Ferrari. Reunite the entire squad from back in the day. Vettel could be a shout. He can come do what he couldn't do before, but it might be a shout. Brilliant. That's the biggest problem. There isn't a guy, or girl, whichever way you want to look at it. That is like the next one in terms of the person who could lead Ferrari back. And to me, I've actually said I'd give Binotto until the end of next season, because in the time that he's been at Ferrari, obviously 2019 is when he took over from Arriva Bene. In that time, he is the two things that he's changed, which are very difficult to change, is the culture of the team. It's become a lot less blame game. He's clearly protecting his team a lot. He's taking most of the flack. He doesn't care about, saying in the media that we didn't actually make any mistakes. It was just circumstance, when blatantly they did make mistakes, because he doesn't want, the pressure to be on the team, because they're under enough pressure as it is being Ferrari. And the second and the most important thing that he's done is the technical department has built a good car. That is the number one most difficult thing to do in Formula One. So to me, just through that, this is their Ferrari's first proper championship challenging season. Like, this is only just, the first proper season. And I know that Formula One is like cutthroat, and of course it is. And I don't know if he is the man, because I'm having doubts, race by race. But to me, it's the next season is the one where you can have 2022 can be your year of pain. It can be, you've built a great car. You do have a good dynamic within the team. You've got two absolutely top draw drivers. Charles Leclerc is good enough and quick enough to win a championship. this year you can make mistakes and, you can do all, this is your pain year, your learning year, your growing year. You're going to go into 2023 having learned all of those lessons. I think that's why next year to me is his final chance, and I'd give him until the end of next year before I'd go, yeah, now it's time to get rid of him, because I feel like he's done enough at Ferrari to bring them back from where they were, that he deserves another year to kind of learn from the mistakes from this year. Leclerc too as well, by the way. It's not just Binotto, and also Carlos Sainz as well. He really struggled at the beginning of the season, and I think next year is the one where if you don't get it done, or at the very least, go to a title decider or within two races and push for the championship, then I think it's time to look in a different direction.
Could we potentially see something like driver transfers? Could you see team principal transfers? A little swap with Alfa Romeo, Frédéric Vasseur swapping for Ferrari. Could maybe that's what Binotto needs. He needs to leave Ferrari, join Audi, and try and lead a team that way from day dot. Whereas Frédéric Vasseur, good old Freddie, he's like, bless him. The car, we've said this all season, when the car works, it works. When it doesn't work, it really doesn't. But maybe he's more.
And then when Latifi's taking your number one driver out, that doesn't help either.
Exactly that. But maybe do you think maybe we could see something like a team principal driver swap?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, I don't think, even if Matteo Binotto is, fired as the team principal, let's say how it is, he'd still work at Ferrari. He was a great technical director. He was an engine guy back in the Schumacher era, so there is a place for him at the team, of course. But I mean, Ferrari have been chopping and changing over the last, I think they've had like 14 principals over the last 10 years, so you've got to be very careful, because it's very easy to get rid of someone. It's a lot more difficult to replace them with the right person. So that's why I'd go, yes, I'd kind of look for options in 2023, but I would give him that, I would give him next year, and the Ferrari team in general, both for Leclerc to get better, for Carlos Sainz to not start on the back foot and be there from the very first race. And 2023 is the big season where you had your mistakes last year, now it's time to deliver. So yeah, I'm not saying I disagree with you in certain terms of is Binotto the guy to really gather the team and kind of lead everyone on the pit wall, whilst the drivers do the business on the track, but I think he deserves one more season, and 2023 is when he could be out.
Fair enough. Well, I think I was just a bit more cutthroat because, I think just because they've just had it's such a weird thing saying Ferrari having will have like an underdog story, this, now they can bounce back. It's a bit like, what, Ferrari? Like, what are you on about, mate? Sort of thing. But yeah, hopefully get it all sorted up. But now let's get on to the head-to-heads. For those who don't know, we go through each of the teams and we put their drivers head-to-head, and we pick who is our driver for the team for that weekend, and go through that. So let's start off then with the top team, Red Bull. I think this one's going to be pretty obvious. Obviously, it's going to, for me, it's going to be Max Verstappen over Perez. Perez did a good race, still got at P2, but ultimately, having that charge come through from Max Verstappen P14 to P1, I feel like it's pretty obvious, Adas, isn't it, between us? I think for the next few ones, it's going to be pretty obvious, isn't it, of who our picks are going to be. So I'm guessing Verstappen for you as well.
Yeah, definitely. I will give a bit. I mean, obviously Max I think this was arguably his best ever drive when you look at just the raw performance, the pace that he had over the field in his pocket. Always had he did his quali lap 6/10 quicker than Sainz on one lap, literally just in and out. There you go, 6/10 quicker than the entire field. So that just shows you how much it was easier for him in the race, and that's all credit to him and the team and the car that they've built. But also I think Perez, in a weird way, I think it wasn't a great race by Perez because he absolutely bottled it at the beginning and kind of brought it back later on. But he's now second in the championship, and I feel like I think it's been a good season by Checo. He's done exactly what he needs to do. He's had his ups and downs as well, which is what you're going to get as Max Verstappen's teammate, but second in the championship ahead of both of the Ferraris. I feel like over the course of the season, he's actually done an okay job as the driver that we know as the number 2. But yeah, it's got to be Max. This was him at his absolute best, and we're seeing one of the greatest drivers of all time, I think, at his absolute peak. Absolutely. And I think also a good mention is as well, there was obviously a lot of upset from last season. Even some people going to say Verstappen, he's technically not really the champion because it was handed to him by... Mickey Mouse champion. Yeah, literally that, yeah. Whereas with this season, it's okay, well, if last season didn't really count, then this season definitely counts. There's been no sort of sort of funny business or anything. Yeah, flexi floor tax, flexi floor tax, mate.
Yeah, isn't that funny that there was so many people talking about coming into Spa, Mercedes, they're going to be bouncing back because of all this flexi floor thing, and if anything. Yeah, literally. And if anything now, they're just doing even better. And I was so surprised. We'll go on to Mercedes in a sec, but I was just so surprised that so many people were expecting, Mercedes to bounce back from this. And it's just a bit and it's just Absolute
I think
bullshit.
it was Christian Horner though on Sky. Someone did ask him like, "Why do you think Max has just been on another level in Spa?" And I think he took a little dig and said, "Oh, it must be the flexi floor technical directive or something like that." Like, I love that little dig from Horner. He knows when to kind of
he
get
knows
him
what to do. Absolutely.
Exactly.
So if we go down now into the next team for the podium, which was Ferrari. Yeah, I think Sainz did a great job today. More yesterday. I think, it's a good one from Sainz. I've got to give it to him over Leclerc, purely on the basis, from what I saw, Sainz didn't make any mistakes, kind of just did what he did. I think he did extract all he could from the car. Obviously we've got to put a bit of tax into Leclerc for having a little bit of a speeding in the pit lane, having a bit of there. But also he did the job though. He got the Ferrari onto the podium. He did try to keep it in between sort of Verstappen and Perez, but unfortunately, as you said, I think even Leclerc said it after the race, Red Bull just on another level. But yeah, for me, I've got to go Sainz on this one.
Yeah, definitely got to go Sainz. There's not really much more that he could have done. I mean, it was actually a pretty good job to out-qualify Perez yesterday, and he got a decent start. There was nothing he could have done. Whatever tires you wanted to throw on the Ferrari, whatever, strategy you wanted to try, it was going to be, the Red Bulls were just had too much pace, even on Perez's side. So he did almost bottle it to George Russell, and I was watching that gap for the last 10 laps. I was like, come on, George. But yeah, it didn't quite happen. But yeah, to me, it's going to go to Sainz.
Yeah, and somehow he managed to keep it out of the gravel trap, which it's really surprising to me. But now let's get on to the Mercedes then. Obviously, I think this one we've got to just give it straight to George Russell. I think, got P4, didn't make any mistakes, unlike his teammate, unfortunately. And yeah, as you said, he was only like a 1 or 2 seconds behind Sainz. If we had a couple more laps, maybe we could have even potentially, because there was that a bit of tension towards the end of the race, maybe he could get the podium here. But I think by that point, I think George said he made a little tiny mistake of just a little lock up, and then the tyres from there was just having to manage it. I know Sainz was also was in the same ballpark of having to manage his tyres as well. But ultimately, I think, again, with all these ones, didn't make any mistakes, and that's it.
Yeah, it's got to be King Russell. I mean, it's just still every single race he's finished this season, he's always been in the top 5. I mean, that's consistency right there. And I think good performance by him. I still think that Lewis had, that's why I was so frustrated with that collision by Lewis, because if George Russell is finishing 2 seconds behind Carlos Sainz, with Lewis Hamilton's speed, and he does seem to have, especially since I think Canada was the really big turning point, he does seem to have a tenth or two just over George Russell in qualifying, and he has that experience in the race as well, and the time management that Lewis has just got on lock. I would have been very kind of interested to see what Lewis would have been able to do, because I think he would have been ahead of Sainz as well. So I think that might have been a podium for Lewis. I do think that if George Russell's finishing 2 seconds behind, then I can't take that off the table. But ultimately, he made a mistake, and it's got to go to George, who I think he's just consistency, isn't he? It might be a bit boring. There's not really much to talk about, but he's just amazing. So yeah, I've been very happy with King George and his season so far. Yeah,
I don't think I think I would have to disagree about Hamilton getting to the podium. I think they would have probably been in the same position. I think we're at this point now where both Lewis and Russell, they're pretty much equally matched in terms of pace. Obviously, I know, Lewis did out-qualify Russell, but not by much. And, to be fair, I think they're now pretty much equally matched. And obviously, at the beginning of the season, Lewis was still having some issues sort of adapting to the car, but that's obviously because they're testing out newer things to the more seasoned veteran, whereas, they're trying out different things in terms of the bodywork and different setup styles. But I think they're pretty much equally matched now. So I still think if Hamilton hadn't had that collision, I still think he probably would have gone a P4, maybe even a P5, depending on him and Russell. But I think, he
was fighting for Alonso for P2 though, so you never know. He would have been ahead of Sainz, so true, Sainz would have had to overtake Hamilton.
Yeah, but then let's go on to Alpine. Alonso and Ocon, fair play to them. I think it's so clear now they are the quickest of the midfield pack. I mean, both of them were absolutely lightning quick, and as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, some great moves from Ocon, and also Alonso. I think Alonso had a bit of not a quiet race, don't say that, but obviously towards the end he had that little sort of a little scrap with Leclerc. Obviously I think with this one, I think I've got to go I think for this one, actually, I think I've got to go with Ocon here. I've got to go with Ocon in this one because, I can't. Was Ocon one of the ones who had the penalties?
He did, and he actually out-qualified Alonso as well. I think they finished. They qualified right next to each other, but Ocon was in front.
Yeah, and I think although Alonso, yes, he did get P5, where in the race it was technically P6, removing the penalty. Ocon got it up to P7, and I think, some of the moves he made were like outstanding. And like, I think this season he's really coming alive. I know obviously last season he was decent as well, but I think this one is where, at least I think in terms of screen time, we're actually getting to see a bit more of what he's capable of. And like, I think it just goes to show that, that Alpine, for me, is going to win the midfield battle here. And like, it just goes to show, I think they are going to get P3 in the constructors. And yeah, Alonso and P4, sorry, apologies. P3, they're going to get P, no. But I think I think they've just really shot, like, they've just done such a great job with that car. And both drivers, they're not making these silly mistakes, and they're just extracting everything they can from it. I mean, also fair play to Alonso. Yes, you have that contact, and I think obviously he had a bit of damage to the front
on
left on the end plate, but not enough that it's like broken or flapping off. It was pretty much just look like it just bent a little bit, which
I think similar to Leclerc in Silverstone. I think something like that.
Yeah, and it's like it just bent it a little bit, not breaking. And I think fair play to like it clearly didn't do any damage in terms of pace or anything, considering how dramatic the actual jump over was. But yeah, for this one, I've got to give it to Ocon.
First of all, just going back a little bit, you said, I think this was a quiet race for Fernando. Has Fernando Alonso ever had a quiet race? Like, I don't remember one.
Yeah, ignoring the beginning. And then the little bit at the end, the 2 laps at the end, in the middle bit. I don't know. Maybe my memory's just I'm getting old. I just can't remember as much. So then maybe that's why. But
no arguments here. But joking aside, I think this race was actually. I think it just epitomizes why I do think that Alpine have arguably the 4th or 3rd best driver lineup on the grid. Like, you have one driver starting in the top 10, with good points on the table in Alonso. He almost gets up into P2, and he still kind of maximizes where the car could have been, even doing better, getting up into P5. And you have the other driver starting outside of the points and still, getting up to behind Alonso, both of them maximizing what could have been possible. And you have a strong car, you have one of the best driver lineups. It's just like, how did Alpine bottle this for 2023? But we're going to see, obviously, actually, even today, obviously, Oscar Piastri's contract recognitions board hearing is today, so that'll be quite interesting. But I'm still going to go with Alonso, but it's so close. I mean, that takes nothing away from Ocon. What a drive by Ocon. But ultimately, Fernando did kind of everything that he could have. He, got up into P2. Had it not been for that collision, that would have been quite an interesting one, between him and Hamilton. And even after that, he drove, I think, a very good race, fall back as well. Because I think after his last pit stop, he got put back into some traffic. So he did have to overtake. And finishing in P5, Ocon in P7, great result for the team. And I can't believe they bottled this driver lineup for next year. But yeah, Ocon still did a great job. I'm going to go with Alonso.
Absolutely. Let's go on to then Aston Martin. You got Vettel in P8 and you've got Stroll P11. Stroll out qualifying Vettel, I believe, in qualifying. But then obviously, like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, Vettel getting his elbows out, kicking him into the gravel and knocking him down 2 spots, and ironically finishing 2 spots behind, or 3 spots actually. I can't count anymore. I think I've got to go. Yeah, I think I'm kidding. I'm going to go to Vettel. Obviously, he made some moves during the race, which was great. Pretty much everything seemed to go down into Lecom. That was kind of like the main sort of area for all the overtakes we were sort of seeing. We had a few side by sides going down to Eau Rouge and Radion, especially at the very beginning of the race as well. I think he was battling against Ricciardo, sort of going down it, and straight away I was a bit like, a bit sketch, but. Yeah, I think with this one, it's fair play to actually Aston Martin. They've obviously struggled at the very beginning of the season, but now both of them they're kind of doing this kind of shows, like we were sort of saying earlier with like Latifi. The Aston car, it's not performing that well this season, but when you've got 2 drivers who are not making as many mistakes, they're sort of delivering all right with it. And, you got Vettel here in P8, and also, although Stroll is just outside of the points, he's only in 11th, so that's not nothing you can sort of really bash him about. So, I mean, fair play to both of them. They are working, they're doing great. They need to be, if they're wanting to get more points in the constructors, they need to be a bit more like respectful of each other. But also, I respect Vettel for like not giving a fuck because it's his last season and he just wants to do what he wants. So, but yeah, for me on this one, I've got to give it to Vettel.
Yeah, got to be Seb. I thought what was really good is that the car is definitely getting better. Maybe it suited it a little bit more on this track. Like Seb said that he was really surprised about how good the tire wear was on the Aston Martin. So it does have these kind of plus points. It's still a bit of an inconsistent car, but yeah, great race by Seb. P8. He was also pushing Fernando at one point. Like I remember that last pit stop for Fernando. He kind of had to pit because Vettel was kind of closing in on him. So maybe could have been an even bigger result on the table. But yeah, great performance by Seb. I kind of feel similar to the Williams situation, however, where with Lance Stroll, that if you had someone like Seb Ocon, Seb Fernando, even Seb Lando, God, all that rhymed, didn't it? But if you had like any combination of those drivers, I think Aston Martin could be doing a lot better in terms of the constructors, maybe even ahead of AlphaTauri. So yeah, it was a great performance by Seb, but as good as Lance Stroll can be, I still think that he doesn't lack that. He kind of lacks that consistency. So yeah, definitely an easy Seb dub, but yeah, I think arguably maybe his best performance.
And so then let's move on to, who should we go on to next? Let's go on to AlphaTauri, I think. Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly. So let me have a quick look at the standings here. So I think, Gasly finished P9th and then Yuki down in P13. Yeah. I think, did they both get penalties or was it just Yuki? I think it was just Yuki who got it.
It was just Yuki, but Pierre Gasly's engine actually failed to start on the grid. Like actually, I think Gasly also had an engine penalty, but I think he was he qualified technically ahead of Verstappen.
He started, and so we saw that empty grid slot in his in his box. So he had to start from the grid, unfortunately. And
then he said that they literally fired his engine up like 30 seconds to go. So he only just started the race, and it's a good job he did because, scoring that P9. There's a few rumors of him potentially going to Alpine. So this result, during a difficult season where the car hasn't quite been there, and I don't think Pierre's also been at his best as well. This result is perfectly timed, and I've definitely got to go with Gasly.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agreed. Starting P8 to have all those issues on. Did he even make it to the grid in time, or did they just couldn't get out the garage?
They couldn't. Yeah, they couldn't start the car, so I think they just left them in the garage.
Yeah, because there's also a certain cutoff point as well, isn't there? To you go out and you do your reconnaissance lap, see if it works. But then I think there's a certain shut-off point where if you can't make it in time to the grid, I think that's basically when they start inviting all the VIPs out onto the grid. Therefore, if you can't make it there, then therefore it's there's a certain point before I think it's like 5 or 10 minutes before the race, then you have to start from the pit lane. But to go from literally, I know everyone kept saying it, the back of the grid for everyone who got penalties, from starting from the actual back of the grid and then some because you're starting from the pit lane. So as soon as they've cleared the pit exit and gone already up Eau Rouge and Raduan, that's when then Gasly could go. To go from that, obviously you got the safety car, but then go from that to then ahead of your teammate to P9. Yeah, as you said, I think it's a great case in point for him if he was to switch to another team. Whatever team it might be, then absolutely is all fine. And the only reason I think obviously he would be moving is because obviously he would be able to progress up into the main Red Bull family again because of other reasons. But yeah, so I think for this one, I've got to give it to Gasly. But I mean, Yuki, it's a bit of a shame, I think he started P14, I think, and only getting up to P13. A bit of a shame with this one, but if we move on...
We saw Liam Lawson in the car, so it's not as if Yuki's seat is safe either. So
exactly, yeah.
Very interesting. I think very interesting kind of few races left for Yuki because he's got to really turn it up.
Yeah. On to then Williams, which obviously we've already talked about in some great length with Latifi celebrating his last race at Spa and Albon in P10. Clearly, it's got to go to Albon. He's doing so amazing in that seat. I think Tomo is obviously going to be head over heels with it, and it's just so good to see him now properly performing. And I know it's P10. And in terms of the relative, he's not performing. He's not in the top. He's performing the most out of the car, and he's clearly showing he's just a next level racer. And it's just so good to see for him. But I'm guessing for you, mate, is Albon as well.
Yeah, it's got to be Albon. Great performance when the car was there. He took full advantage of it. Him and the team did a great job setting up. And there was also a lot of, I think he said after the race, there was also a lot of kind of tuition in terms of cooling the tires and kind of because they were struggling with overheating as well. So yeah, it was a great all-round performance. He really did. He was kind of at the head of that train, so he managed to hold everyone off perfectly and a thoroughly deserved a point at the end.
Yeah. So let's move on then to McLaren. We've got Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo. Lando finishing P12 and Ricciardo P15. Obviously, we had all the big news over the summer break, of Ricciardo leaving McLaren. Currently don't know, as of time of recording, where his next steps will be. Will he take a year out of the sport? Will he move to another team like Alpine or Haas or whoever it might be? Fuck you. But yeah, basically that's all up in the air at the moment, and obviously he's now going to be coming into these next few races, and it's gonna for Ricciardo, obviously it's going to be up in the air of if it's going to very much be like a fuck you to McLaren, or if he's just going to sort of still try and perform as best as he can to kind of solidify why he should still be in the sport. Yeah, a bit of a shame. Obviously, Ricciardo just missing out and getting knocked out of missing out on Q3. Literally, I think it's by 0.09th of this, or a ninth or a tenth out of the qualifying. But still, it's a small margins there, which he needs to deliver on. Seemed to struggle. Obviously, him and Lando on different sort of tyre strategies, and so unfortunately, I think they both said after the race, yes, they can be within sort of DRS of a car, but there just wasn't enough straight line speed to get ahead. Because I think
quite
they went
a draggy car, that McLaren.
Yeah, they very much set up the car more for drag rather than high speed, which is kind of the opposite with the Alpine. With the Alpine, the straight line speed they've got on it is great, so they just reduced any drag they had on that. But yeah, Lando, out qualifying Ricciardo and performing, getting ahead of him here, even with the penalties as well. Yeah, obviously he's got to go to Norris. It breaks my heart, but yeah, I think we can't all just forget these struggles of Ricciardo. It's not now that the announcements come out, it's not like these struggles are now going to go away for Ricciardo. But he's going to start.
He's going to start getting on the podium now, mate. Monza's still yet to come.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be Lando. The car just didn't work at all.
No.
Whether it was the setup or the tires, the car didn't work. Both of the drivers weren't exactly happy. They got caught in the train. Lando finished again. Whatever strategy they would have put, they tried two different strategies and both of them didn't work. So that tells you everything they need to know.
And then, pretty much that. Yeah, neither of them scoring a point. So even though Lando did finish ahead, effectively they're trying the different strategies to try and gauge anything onto getting into the points, and it seemed just whatever they were throwing at the drivers, it just wasn't really working. Because it's just when you're not in the DRS train and you're at the front of it, then you're going to get caught out. Because obviously, Ricciardo was at the very front of the DRS train and Lando was pretty much behind. So naturally, if you've not got a toe on anyone, you're just going to be the sitting duck. And unfortunately, that's where we end up. But then going on to
Ricciardo couldn't keep up with the Williams because it was so slippy.
Exactly that. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's in the straight line speed. The Williams. As we said earlier, had zero sort of drag on it, so it meant in the corners it was quite twitchy, but in the straight line speed, it's just next level. So, but then moving on to let's go on to Alfa Romeo, Zhou Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas. It's hard to judge, obviously, because you got Zhou, who's in P14. Just kind of being stuck towards the back of that DRS train, and then obviously Bottas being taken out by the goat. So. Zhou, sure.
I love how difficult you're finding it. It's got to be Zhou, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
He said on a thing on Instagram and Twitter they basically just got stuck in the train, and I think Williams actually replied with a little joke or something like, "Did you enjoy being in the train?" I forget, something like that. But Williams took a little dig, which I thought was pretty funny. But yeah, it's got to be Zhou. But yeah, the Alfa Romeo not quite performing how I thought it would. Hopefully they do bounce back, because Zhou is another one of those drivers, along with Mick Schumacher and also Yuki Tsunoda, who I want to see how they do in that second half of the season, because I don't think his seat is also 100% safe either.
Yeah. And then moving on to the last team, Haas, with Kevin Magnussen and Mick Schumacher.
Literally no clue what happened to them, by the way. I did not
nothing
see them
at all.
Once.
Which was really surprising, because I think on the starting grid, I think Magnussen was P12, because obviously I don't think he took a penalty, but he was in a decent position, and then they basically end P18, P17. Kevin qualified really well. Technically then did obviously, finish ahead of Mick Schumacher. I'm assuming it's more just because of what the actual car. Obviously, my pick's obviously going to go to Kevin. There isn't much of a fraud watch here because we didn't actually see much of them during the race. But I mean, again, it's the thing of
spot. Can't
find them, can't see them. But yeah, again, it's another case in point. Mick needs to be closer to his team. I I need to get a list here of like all the people who actually got penalties. I think Mick got a penalty.
Mick Schumacher also had a penalty. I don't think he even qualified because there was just no point.
Yeah, but even then though, it's sort of like it's because I know Bottas kind of had the same thing because he was taking the penalty, but even then, I know they didn't try to push the car in qualifying. But even then, I'm like, well, still want to try and be better than the rest, even. But yeah, I think in that one's obviously clear. Just got to go to Kevin. But like again, we didn't see them, so it's hard to kind of judge it. But I mean, like Kevin, yeah, qualified P12, but I think then the car performance just meant they just went to the back of the grid, unfortunately.
Yeah, they just felt like a stone. I didn't see them once, like not a single replay, not a single time on track. Like maybe they were getting lapped at one point and they were kind of in the background, but yeah didn't see them once. I've got to give it to K-Mag, but that's purely just on the result, not based on any actual performance.
But I think that's pretty much it. I think we'll wrap it up there. Make sure to also comment down below if you're watching us on YouTube what your picks are for the head-to-heads. And as a reminder, if you're not following us already, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on your whatever podcast play you're doing.
You're running out of tires, mate. You're running like you're degrading, just like the tires at Spa.
Exactly that, yeah. And also make sure to vote us 5 stars on Spotify as well. You can only do that, I think, during on your phone, but make sure to rate us 5 stars. But I think we'll wrap it there. So thanks so much for listening and watching us again. We'll be back next week for the Dutch Grand Prix, and we'll see you then. Thanks very much for watching, and see you later on. Bye.
Bye.